Good.
All right, welcome back to part 3 of our supersized season preview blowout for Rutgers football. In the previous 2 episodes, if you listened along, if you haven't already, please go out and listen to them. I think it'll provide a lot of context for what we're about to talk about. But this is part 3 where we talk about the schedule and we talk about the predictions that we all think are going to happen this year with Rutgers football in terms of wins and losses. Before we get into that, this podcast is once again brought to you by Night and Day Apparel. Get ready for the football and tailgating season with Night and Day Apparel. Our apparel is designed to keep you comfortable and stylish from pregame excitement to the final whistle. Whether you're grilling in the parking lot or cheering from the stands, our high-quality gear has you covered with unbeatable comfort and team spirit. Use our promo code Rutgers Rivals to get 10% off your purchase. Score big this season and keep shopping with Night and Day Apparel. So this schedule, as we all know, is unlike any that Rutgers has seen in the Big Ten thus far because they avoid all the big boys. They avoid Ohio State, they avoid Oregon, they avoid Penn State, they avoid Michigan, they avoid Iowa. We've all talked about that ad nauseum. We all kind of know the table setting for that. But let's kind of go into individual games, and we'll have 3 topics. We're going to go over what we think is the hardest game on the schedule, what we think is the most important game on the schedule, and one trap game on the schedule before we go into game-by-game predictions. So starting off with you, David, what do you think is the most important game on the schedule for Rutgers football this season?
The most important game on the schedule for Rutgers this year? That's a really tough question because I think games they could lose, and if they rebound with a win the next week, it would be big. I think the most important game is actually going to be that Minnesota game coming out of the second bye. And the reason I say that is because I think Rutgers has to win that game. I think Rutgers should win that game. Rutgers has proven they have done a good job always when they're coming off of a bye or an extended break, whether it be a bowl game, season opener under this coaching staff. I just think they have to win that game because all those last 4 games are winnable. And if you come out of that with a loss, then that might really sour either a chance at a bowl game or trying to have a special season.
Yeah, I think that's a really good choice. I'm going to go with Washington on Friday night, short rest, Big Ten home opener. That Virginia Tech game is a really difficult game in Blacksburg. I personally think Brent Pry has had the Rutgers game scheduled for a long time. They have pretty much every starter back on both sides of the ball. I'm not saying Rutgers can't win that game, but that's going to be a very, very difficult game to win. And then after the Washington game, you go to Nebraska and then Wisconsin at home. So things get real very quickly. I do think the Washington game, I think too many Rutgers fans, to be honest with you, are kind of counting it as a W, pun intended, with Washington. But I think that if you lose that game, things could unravel pretty quickly. And obviously being on short rest, which Washington will be as well, but it's a blackout game. If you want to keep the momentum in terms of the fan excitement and just build some confidence back, let's just say, they do win that game at Virginia Tech. You have a chance to be 4-0 going into October. That would be massive just for perception and the confidence of the team. And then if you lose that game, if you then lose Washington, you're 2-2 going into a pretty tough stretch where you could go 1-3 in October. So I think that Washington game is the most important game on the schedule, just in terms of where it falls in the schedule and what it could mean for the rest of the season.
I'm going to go in the same vein there, but a little bit different. I think Virginia Tech is the most important game. And the reason is similar to what Aaron said. You build up that 3-0 schedule there, and you won on the road against an old foe who's formidable. You take an L against Washington. I mean, we'll get into game by game, but I think there's a decent chance you split the next 2 games regardless. You build up that 3-win cushion and you lose Washington, it's not going to be good. A lot of fans think we can beat them. We can beat them. But you're 3-1 now. You still have plenty of time to recalibrate. You lose that game, and not that it's, some huge blemish that you can't recover from. It's a road game. It's a tough game. But you are now, you do drop to Washington or you drop to Nebraska. Now you're looking middling instead of building up this momentum. I think it's important to beat them early in the season. I think not only important to beat them, I think if it's a close game, it's important to decisively beat them. Line up the way we did against Northwestern and VTech last year, not necessarily dominate to the point that there's no doubt about it because it's a road game. It's going to be a tough environment. But build some confidence that you're a Big Ten team. This is an ACC team for this tough stretch in the Big Ten. It's extremely important to go out there and take a tough game on the road to set yourself up at 3-0 to take whatever ebbs and flows the Big Ten schedule is going to offer you. If you drop that VTech game, things are a lot tougher against Washington and beyond. So I think we got to go in there and win that.
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech's probably the toughest one. It's the most important game because you, like you said, it's just kind of echoing what everyone else said. Basically, you lose that game, and then all of a sudden morale's down. Everyone's like, "Oh, well, we can't even beat this middle of the pack ACC team." But I know they're not really middle of the pack; they're more towards the top of the ACC this year, I guess. But you lose that game, and it just kind of hurts everything from people showing up in the stands. I think that next Friday night be a little bit more empty than you probably previously expected. And then probably the trap game of the year would be that Washington game. If you do beat Virginia Tech, you're going to be riding an ultimate high. And then going into Game 4, it's a Friday night. You're going to have the crowd on your side. If you're 3-0, everything's going to be rowdy. Everything's going to go nuts. And then all of a sudden, you might just fall flat on your face.
Yeah, so I'm gonna be boring and also pick Virginia Tech, but for a few reasons. One, it was a team that the team should have confidence playing because of how they performed last year. I mean, I don't expect another 19-point beatdown. We all kind of went into why that was for a lot of reasons. One, we played them the first game Kyron Drones started on the season. It was a team that kind of didn't have an identity, but as the season went on, Brent probably really established that. But if you look at some of the expectations for this team this year that I am in part responsible for kind of pushing, I think they're in line for a potentially big season. If you're going to achieve that ceiling outcome, you really need to go in and win this game early because you're going to be playing a lot of tough road games this year. People are looking ahead of Michigan State late in the season, but like Michigan State, I think has a pretty wide variance in terms of, what they could be as a team, given they have a really good coach in Jonathan Smith. Aiden Childs could be a fully formed high-end quarterback by the end of the season. But if you go in and win a game in Blacksburg in that kind of environment, I think it really does set the tone for the whole season, similar to how the 2006 season, opening day, we play at North Carolina. It was a pretty rowdy crowd. Like I know that Larry's got a connection to that team on the other side of things, but Rutgers went in and they won a really tough game opening season. Something North Carolina ended up being a good team by the end of the year, but that team was fairly even with Rutgers, and Rutgers showed the grit to finish them off, unlike the previous year when they started at Illinois and lost in a heartbreaker late in that game. So I think this is the key for the tone setting of the season. It's not the end of the world if they lose it because it's not a conference game. It's not going to go against their final standings in terms of the Big Ten. But I think in terms of setting a tone for the year, if they win that game, I think you can seriously raise the expectations of the season for the rest of the year. Let's talk about the hardest game now. Aaron, where do you see the hardest game on the schedule lying for Rutgers?
Yeah, it's at USC, short rest Friday night in the Coliseum. I think on paper, their toughest opponent just in terms of talent. From a recruiting perspective, USC has 4 and 5 stars everywhere. It'd be interesting to see where USC is at that point. But they're obviously the only ranked foe on the schedule as of right now. But I think in terms of just looking at the schedule going into the year, you could see Rutgers being the biggest underdog they'll be in any game in that situation. So I think that's the toughest game, especially coming off a short rest and the stretch we talked about in October. That's, and right before the bye as well. This team is going to be needing that bye very much. So I think this is the toughest game for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it's USC. And by the way, to allude back to what Mike said, one day when I get permission, I'll tell some stories about 06. I have a few 06 stories. That's the best one. But these football dudes are super close to the vest, unlike me, who's just out there with everything. But anyway, USC. USC. We're 11 p.m. kickoff. Good team. What's expected to be a good team. All the way on the West Coast. I think we got lucky with a lot of the West Coast travel, East Coast travel this year where teams are coming to us. But that game, we're going out to them. Getting through, UCLA, we could say is maybe like there are no real breaks in the Big Ten, but maybe the break after those 2 games against them at Nebraska and home for Wisconsin. Now you got to go out and you got to, in the middle of the season, play USC. Toughest game on the schedule by far from where I'm sitting, although We don't have the disparity we usually have, where just some games are unwinnable and some games are just completely, without a doubt going to win. Aside from probably the first two, it's the toughest game on the schedule. It's going to be tough for us.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing. Friday night, 11 p.m. kickoff. I know after talking to some people within the team that they're going to hire a bunch of sleep specialists to kind of help them adjust and help the team adjust to that 11 p.m. kickoff. You got to think that game's probably not going to end till what, 1:30ish, around there, maybe long. Oh, I'm thinking,
later than that. Yeah,
later than that. Yeah, you're going to have a trouble keeping Pat Flaherty awake. Like it's not going to be easy. You got to keep these guys up. Like it's going to be tough. And I mean, I'm not saying that because of their offense and it's just very boring, a little bit boring. But that wait time, it's going to be tough for those older guys, but not just them, but the team themselves. I know you can do all this. You can hire whoever you want to try to help you sleep better. There's no adjusting to a time zone difference. It's just not a reality. You kind of just got to figure it out as you go, in my opinion. On top of that, it's the gauntlet of the schedule. That's going to be game 6 in the 6 weeks. And that's the big one because you have 2 games by, 6 games by, then 4 games to finish it off. So that is the end of the gauntlet. And people are probably going to be looking ahead to that bye week. They're probably dinged up. They're probably not 100%. They're probably just saying, hey, if we can get to that bye week, we can recover for at least a week or 2 weeks, whatever. And I think that game's just everything kind of adds up to make it a hard game as is. Plus the fact that USC's got a pretty good head coach. They usually have a pretty good offense. And they're usually a pretty good team. So it's not going to be easy nonetheless, but we just kind of have to wait and see.
So I want to agree with the sentiments that there are no automatic L's in the schedule like there previously were. I think there's not a scenario where you tell me Rutgers wins game X or game Y on this schedule where it blows me away. I think USC makes a lot of sense for a lot of the reasons you guys listed, but it's also their 6th game in 6 weeks that they'll be playing. They tend to struggle with physicality. If you look at who has given them struggles over the years, it's been Stanford. I know this is a different coaching staff, but it's been Utah in recent years. So I do think Rutgers matches up with them well. It's more so, the short rest. It's the long distance travel. It's 6 games in 6 weeks. I'm going to go a little bit of an audible here. I'm going to say at Nebraska. Nebraska's going to have 96,000 fans there. Dylan Raiola, if you've watched any of the tape on him, at least preseason spring game stuff, the guy looks like Patrick Mahomes. Not saying he'll be that as a freshman, but if he hits kind of the upper end of his outcome range this year, I think that's going to be probably the best quarterback we could potentially face all year. Matt Rule in year 2, I think he's going to take that team forward. They've landed a lot of really high-end transfers. They've recruited well. I'm going to say Nebraska just to be a little bit different, but my 1B is certainly USC on the road.
I'll say USC number 1. It's the only game that ESPN FPI has them below a 43% chance of winning. So pretty much everything else is much higher than that. I will pivot, though, and I will say I think that Virginia Tech game is going to be really tough. As I've said to Aaron and at our previous stop, I think the big thing for this team is always getting the monkey off their back for their first Power 5 or even conference win. And Blacksburg's not an easy place to play. Rutgers may be a little overconfident after last year. I think USC is the toughest game, but I think that Virginia Tech game is going to be less than a 50-50, even if every analytical site says that Rutgers is between like 48 and 51% chance.
So to round out the topics here, if there's one game on the schedule that's either a trap game or you look back at the end of the year and say, how the F did we lose that game? Which team do you think that is? Which game do you think that is, Larry?
I don't expect a loss here per se, but if something could go completely off the rails kind of thing, I'm tempted to say Washington because, I personally think they have a better chance of probably winning that game. But I think UCLA could be, if we're talking about a true trap game where you get caught, nodding off. Look at that. You say we win or we drop one of those Virginia Tech, Washington, Nebraska, Wisconsin games, or even if we're on a winning streak there and we're coming off a high from a home win against Wisconsin, say, and we performed well at Nebraska, well at Washington, win or lose. You're getting ready for this big showdown that everybody's hyping up about USC. You know how our board is. That's going to be going crazy with speculation. The media is going to be looking ahead. The big West Coast East, new Big Ten showdown. Everybody's going to be getting crazy. And all of a sudden you're home and you think you're on this sleepy home game against UCLA. And all of a sudden you shoot yourself in the foot or they come to play. Now, from what I understand, they have a gauntlet leading up to us and they have to travel from west to east. Not going to be easy. But that's why you call it a trap game, right? That's the kind of game where you start making all these reasons why we're going to walk through it and all of a sudden you don't. I don't expect the team to do that. I don't know how the schedule is going to shake out. But if I'm looking at this schedule for what we traditionally call a trap game in between two games and not paying attention, that could be it to me.
It's that Washington game. It's Friday night. The crowd's going to be into it. If they're 3-0, people are going to be hyped. Like, this is going to be a sold-out Rutgers crowd at SHI Stadium. But you could fall flat on your face. This is a Washington team that there's so many unknowns, from new coaching staff, who I think is a good coach in his own right, but also is bringing in an entire new roster, new quarterback. They replaced out of the 22 starters? I think it was like 18, 19, something like that. So it's an entire new Washington team. You really don't know what to expect. And especially if you're 3-0 after that big Virginia Tech win, and you're riding that high, you could literally just fall flat on your face and just be like, I don't know what the hell happened. We were up here and then it just went.
I'm going to also say UCLA because I think a lot of people are pouring a lot of dirt on them. Their coach, Deshaun Foster, really he pulled like a Nick Sirianni. If you remember Nick Sirianni's first press conference, it looked like he had never been kind of media trained at all. So I think everyone kind of expects an epic failure out of them. They still have a lot of talent, especially at the skill positions. The quarterback, they have talent. That doesn't mean that they're going to perform well. But I think if you had to look at a game on the schedule, given where it's positioned, especially if you come off a big win over Wisconsin the following week, I mean, it is homecoming, so it'll be a good crowd, especially if Rutgers is kind of on a roll at that point. But Schiano has kind of had those kind of games in the past, not so much recently. Like, there's not really a game I could think of in the last 2 or 3 years where it's just clearly like at the end of the year, it's like, if we faced that team at game 12 instead of game 3, we would have won it. So maybe he's exercised those W2F games a bit, but I'm going to say UCLA is my game.
I hope you guys still have me here.
Yep, you're still here.
Yep.
I think it's between that UCLA game and the Illinois game. Illinois, I pulled up my Lindy's preview here just to check, because Illinois has a stretch where they have to face at Nebraska, at Penn State, Purdue, Michigan, at Oregon. And then a few weeks later, they will have regrouped before they play Rutgers. I do think Schiano has the advantage against other Big Ten West style ground and pound coaches, but I've seen Rutgers lose to Illinois in some pathetic showings, and it's either UCLA or that game. And so to me, I mean, those are two games where I think they really should win, barring some bizarre situation. So that's why I would say, since you guys said UCLA, I'll take Illinois.
These are all good answers. Sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
These are all good answers. And I think, UCLA is probably the best one. But being such a veteran team on homecoming, I'm not as concerned with that. But if they are 5-1 at that point, could be. But being the elder statesman of the group, I'm going to be paranoid, and I'm going to say Akron, because Schiano said on Monday that you're going to see a lot of new faces playing against Howard, which I'm going to also parlay into probably thinking that's going to be the case against Akron. No one on this panel, I'm confident in saying, is going to pick them to lose against Akron. No Rutgers fans expecting them to lose against Akron. It's a MAC opponent. You never know what's happened. We've seen Rutgers faceplant against MAC opponents in the past. So for me, a true trap game in terms of the game no one would expect them to lose. That Akron game for me is the one that I probably will worry about starting Friday morning.
I mean, I don't blame you. We have started slow against lesser opponents many times under Schiano. Like, you think about that Temple game a few years ago. We ended up winning 36-7. If you just look at the box score, or you just look at the scoreboard, it's like, oh, okay, we won handily. That game was 13-7 in the fourth quarter. Like, that it wasn't until late that we opened the floodgates. So struggling against weaker teams is something Schiano has done, but he hasn't actually blown the games in his 2.0 era. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that doesn't happen, because It would be an epic meltdown if they were to lose that game. I want to talk about something real quick before we get into predictions, and I wrote an article about it on Rivals. It has to do with like the net rest advantage Rutgers has, and I did this also for Penn State for Richie, and it kind of just gave me a more clear picture as to like how big of a deal it is for Rutgers. So some top line items that I think are important. Rutgers does not face a single team coming off their bye this entire season, which is not common and is a huge advantage when you're talking about, especially in the middle of the season, when you're facing a team coming off their bye who can install more of their playbook, who can get more into, training their the younger players. It's just a huge advantage. Now, Rutgers faces 4 teams with a net bye advantage. So if you look at Virginia Tech, you look at Washington, you look at Nebraska, and you look at Minnesota, the first 3 teams, Rutgers faces all 3 of those before any of those 3 teams had a bye. So they face Virginia Tech before they've had their chance to have a first bye, Washington before they've had their first bye, and Nebraska after Rutgers has had their bye. And Minnesota will have had 1 bye versus Rutgers having 2 leading into that. Rutgers also faces 3 teams that will be playing their 6th game in 6 weeks playing the Scarlet Knights. That's Nebraska, that's UCLA, and that's USC. And they play Washington playing their 5th game in 5 weeks. On the season, they have a net plus 17 rest advantage. So just kind of table setting everything for the entire schedule talk. Is there anything that really sticks out to you about the schedule construction before we get into predictions?
Well, I had a quick question. Do we know, is Rutgers a homecoming opponent for any team? Are they homecoming for Nebraska?
They are homecoming for Nebraska. Yep.
Okay. Well, in past years, they've been 2 or 3 games have been homecoming opponents, so that's better.
That's
last year was 3.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I mean, I think that's why you alluded to the crowd that's going to be in that Nebraska game. Not that they don't turn up every week anyway, but that adds to it. I think I would just add to everything you said, which I think is a big built-in advantage to us. I really do. Is the East-West travel too. You got some playing all these games, and then you kind of mitigate it against USC because they are on the 6th game of a 6-game leg. And then with Washington, they're playing 5, and then they have to travel all the way east. I think when you add that in too, we really can't complain about the schedule this year, unlike years past. I think it makes a big difference, and it's a big part of, other than just the opponents. The way the schedule breaks down, I think, is a plus for Rutgers. You should try to take advantage of it.
So I think it matters, but I don't think it matters as much as you're saying. I think these toss-up games, a lot is just going to be dictated once they kick off the football and the way things break. I would put stock in it, but I think these are enough of toss-ups that it's not going to matter as much. I think these teams are going to be prepared, and that's how it's going to go.
David, as somebody who's probably played more football than any of us, and I don't want to speak for anybody in the room, but I think you're the person who's got the most football snaps, both from a coaching and playing perspective. Is there a significant bump you can get, especially at the college level, to having a team getting that bye week and the performance you might see in the following week afterwards?
I mean, I think it matters for veteran teams who know how to take care of their bodies and know how to rest, because often what you'll do, like, again, I didn't play football that much until I was in college, by the way. So, but in our college team, like what we would do is like the starters wouldn't really like play, but those of us who are on the 2nd or 3rd team would play almost like a mini scrimmage that intermediate week. And whether you do it on the Saturday or a different day is beside the point. But I think that for veteran teams, it doesn't, like, they know how to pace themselves. The coaches know how to communicate with the players. And I feel like since Rutgers is a veteran team, it won't impact them as much. I can't speak to like the Washingtons of the world who have a completely new roster. So perhaps Rutgers will benefit from it by default, but I don't think it necessarily helps Rutgers as much as it would potentially hurt other teams. Because the other thing to keep in mind is you get used to your schedule. Like Tuesday we practice in the afternoon on grass, Wednesday we practice late on turf, Thursday we do a walkthrough, whatever the schedule is. And the older you are, the more you know how to arrange simple things like sleeping, eating, all those things to make sure that even if this week's game is a Friday versus a Saturday, that you can adjust. So, I mean, again, I think it hurts inexperienced teams more than it helps experienced teams, but it could matter. And if that's the difference between 1 or 2 wins, like that's a huge thing for a season that only has 12 games.
Sure. Yeah. It's really nice hearing a perspective of somebody who's kind of like gone through the grind of it. Because to me, as just like a spreadsheet guy, it just seems like it'd be a big advantage. But hearing you actually talk through it, it might just be it might be huge for some teams, but not others, like you were saying. Let's get into some predictions. I have a spreadsheet here where we're all going to kind of have it filled out as we go game by game. And so you guys have a visual aid to see who is going to be the most accurate predictor on the season. Now, the first 2 games of the season, does anybody have any objection to me just filling both games out as wins for all of us? Does anyone think that either of the first 2 games are actually going to be a loss? Or if you want to make a significant argument for it, let's do it now.
I think Aaron's bad dream says that, but Aaron.
Yeah. I still have nightmares. I still have nightmares about that 14-0 hole they were in against Howard.
Yes.
Before Janarian and Grant took over.
New Mexico.
I mean, Howard's got some good skill position guys, but you have to assume Rutgers going to win. ESPN has them at 99% for that.
So Aaron's got a point, technically. Like 16 of the last 17 years, a MAC team has taken out a Big Ten team. The only time it didn't happen was last season. And if you look at last season, Akron lost to Indiana by 2, 29-27. Toledo lost to Illinois by 2, 30-28. So I think it's going to be more competitive than people think. But Joe Moorhead's an offensive genius, mind you. Now, he doesn't have the weapons that he did at, like, say, Penn State or Oregon, but I still think they're going to be competitive.
Yeah, and guess who Akron plays in week 1? At Ohio State. So that could be a positive for Rutgers because maybe they just come in walking wounded from that game, or they could come in with some confidence as well. So I think that could go either way. I think obviously worst case scenario, it's a disaster. Players get hurt or certain key players are missing. I think that's kind of the X factor in how close that game could be. And again, Shiano alluding to that today, I thought was a little concerning.
With that being said, does anyone want to mark this as a loss, or are we all going win on the Akron? All right.
No.
Perfect. All right, here's where things start to get interesting. Virginia Tech game. I'm just going to go in order of how they're listed on here rather than do the cycling we've been doing. This I've marked as the most important game of the season. I've already talked about it being a game that we won last year at home by 19 points. It's a much different team. We were very fortuitous playing Virginia Tech when we did last season, because if we played them week 11 instead of week 3 when we did, I believe, or week 4 of last year's season, I think it would have been a totally different game, similar to the Northwestern game. With that all being said, this just feels like a game that Rutgers finds a way to pull out, at least in my head and my fanhood. I'm going to mark this as a win for me. Richie, what do you think? Virginia Tech.
I'm going to say loss. I want to pick wins so badly, but Kyron Drones has just been phenomenal since that Rutgers game last season. He went from not even a starter to 17 touchdowns and 3 interceptions on the year. So they proved that they finally had a quarterback, and that was one of their missing pieces on their offense last year. Returned their 2 top wide receiver weapons in Daquan Felton and I think it was Jalen Lane. And they also added a guy from Old Dominion. They added a tight end transfer. They still have the same running back, if I recall, in Bashal Tootin. I think he's a Jersey guy, actually.
He is.
Yeah. So they return a good chunk of their team. There's a reason they're receiving votes in the top 25 polls. I think Blacksburg, on top of all that, has one of the best college football atmospheres in the country. So it's going to be extremely tough to play there. God forbid it's a night game with that whole whiteout effect thing that they're doing. It makes it even tougher. I think it's going to be a very, very tough game between 2 former Big Ten defensive coordinators as head coaches now, between Brent Pry and Greg Schiano. I just don't know if Rutgers has the offense to kind of keep up with Virginia Tech, and I think unfortunately it's probably going to be a loss.
Well, first I'll say I hope to be at this game. Hopefully we'll have a good contingent, like attended the Rutgers-Wake Forest basketball game last year, but I unfortunately think it's going to be the same result. I'd say it's 50-50, but I'm going to give Rutgers a loss here, even though fun fact, I'm pretty sure the Virginia Tech offensive coordinator was the co-OC at Penn State with Soraka in 2020. I definitely would give Rutgers the advantage at OC, especially I think it was a good point one of you, Richie or Mike, made last year. How did they not realize Kyron Jones should have been their starting QB? Like that coach should have been fired immediately after that. But beyond that, I mean, I just think the luck is eventually going to hit Rutgers with this streak of beating non-Big Ten opponents, and this is a tough place to play. And then I'll go to my tiebreaker factor here, which is I always put stock if you played a quote real team or whoever's played the highest level of competition. And because Virginia Tech will have played Vanderbilt, who's a lesser SEC team, but an SEC nonetheless this weekend, I'm going to mark it as a loss, even though perhaps we watch Vanderbilt kick their butts this weekend and Richie and I want to change our prediction.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm going to go loss as well. I think a theme in terms of how I'm looking at the season is injury concerns. And, this will be hopefully if there are guys that miss the first 2 weeks, this will be their first test. I think there might be a little bit of an adjustment there. I think where this is going to be in terms of the ceiling of the season is I think this is a huge game for Ethan Kaliakmanis and whether Rutgers can come back in games. I think this is a game that very predictably they'll fall behind in, and it's how are they able to get back into the game. It's one of the toughest environments in the country. I think Brent Pry, as I said, I can't remember when I said it in these episodes, but that he has had this game circled, and I think that Virginia Tech is going to be amped up for payback. So I think it's going to be a very tough game for Rutgers to win, and I think it's their first loss of the season.
Virginia Tech is going to have it circled. Virginia Tech improved a lot last year after they played us. Good quarterback play, good coaching. But we're coming off a bye. We had 2 games before that to work out the kinks and get ready. We're going to have guys. I'm telling you, there's going to be guys banged up these first couple weeks. And we're going to be like, what are we going to do when they're coming back? I think you see a good amount of those guys come back for Virginia Tech. And this is a game where, look, this program wants to get over the hump and get where it wants to go. You're a Big Ten team. You could be a really good ACC team. You could be on the road in a really tough environment. We've seen kind of ACC teams too look pretty good in conference and against okay teams from out of conference, and then come up against mid-tier teams or upper-tier teams, which we hope to be this year from the Big Ten, and they don't look exactly the same there caliber-wise. So I'm not taking anything away from them. I think it'll be a back-and-forth game. I think regardless of which way it goes, it'll be a close game. I agree with Aaron. We're going to have to play from behind. It's going to say a lot about our offense coordinator, our quarterback, most of all. It's also going to say something about our defense. I'm up in the air as to whether I'll make the trip just because I love that part of Virginia. It's a nice road trip to take. We'll see. But I've said on my show too, and I predicted a win there. I'm predicting a win here. If it's a loss, it's not the end of the world. But if we want the season to be what we think it can be, and at some point, one of these seasons where it's laid out for you, whether it was last year we were sneaking up on people, but we didn't have the quarterback play, or this year where we're not really sneaking up on people, but the schedule breaks pretty well our way, you got to bring home some of these games that are tough games. You got to find a way to win them. And I'm going with Rutgers pulling it off.
I'm glad somebody joined me in the pool here because it would have felt pretty solitary. But I do want, somebody mentioned playing tough road games, and I just want to mention some of the road atmospheres that Ethan has played in. He's played in a whiteout at Penn State. He's played at Nebraska. He's played at Wisconsin in a big rivalry game. He's played at Iowa. He's played at Ohio State, and he's won more than half those games. He won at Nebraska. He won at Wisconsin. He won at Iowa. So he's won big games. And I don't think the environment of Blacksburg will intimidate him, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll play his best game of the season there either. But I don't think the atmosphere will have him running with urine down his leg like it would maybe somebody else making their third start at Rutgers.
Good point.
That's not a shot at any individual player, just that he's been in those environments. So next up, we have Washington, that Friday night game. I'm going to continue on the copium/optimism train here. I think Rutgers finds a way to win. The new staff in Washington, the new quarterback with Will Rogers, they lose so much talent. 3 NFL receivers. They lose an NFL left tackle. They lose, tons of defensive players. I think Rutgers finds a way to win in this game, which if things go the way I'm predicting on my schedule, that Friday night game in Rutgers might be the best atmosphere that we've seen since maybe Michigan 14. That atmosphere will be absolutely insane if they find a way to win the first 3 games, even if they don't. But I think it's going to be one of the best environments at Rutgers in recent memory, and Rutgers finds a way to win.
Yeah, I'm gonna have Rutgers winning too. This team is depleted. They lost their quarterback. They lost their 3,000-yard wide receiver core. Like it's not happening for this team this year. And I think Fish is a great coach. I think he'll eventually turn it around there. It might not even take him long. He might actually end up getting a bowl game this season, which isn't crazy to say considering they lost 19 of their 22 starters. So I think they're a good coaching staff. I think they have some weapons. I think Rodgers is a good quarterback, but it's just not going to be enough. Traveling across the coast on a Friday night, short rest, it's just not realistic, in my opinion, for Washington to even think they're going to win this one.
I think that 5th game in 5 weeks, somebody already mentioned, is their first road game. Good quarterback. I think they'll have a pretty good defense. And I think we'll all change our opinion on this after we see them play their first game in terms of how confident we are. But it just feels like you guys are saying that Rutgers is going to win this one. I flip back and forth 3 times, but I'll go with a win.
Yeah, I agree. It is their first road game, 4 straight home games. They play Washington State, Northwestern, and then go to Rutgers on short rest. I do think it's going to be a very physical game, a grinded-out game. I don't think Rutgers is going to run away with this one, but I think obviously the crowd, the momentum of that. I think this is where the veteran leadership of this team really pays off, because I think win or lose at Virginia Tech, emotionally, this team's going to have to regroup rather quickly. So I actually think I have confidence in Rutgers to do that, regardless of what happens at Blacksburg, simply because of the strong leadership on this program, the culture, how many veteran guys they have that will be playing in this game, and then getting home and having a true raucous environment for the first time all season will give them that extra edge that I think they get the W.
I think they get the W. I'm hesitant. I was gonna say just because I know we're gonna wind up on a Washington message board now, just like look at these guys, like always happens with us. But I still got to stick to my guns and say win. And I think the reason is I don't think it'll be an easy game by any stretch. I think it'll be a tough game. This is a program that's storied, a program that's normally at the top there and doing well. But the turnover is just so much. They're traveling from west to east. The crowd's going to be off the chain, especially if we're going by my prediction and we're 3-0. Even if we're 2-1, the team's going to need it that much more. Put me down for the W.
So this is where I'm going to end my optimism streak. I have Rutgers losing at Nebraska. Again, it's a game I could see us winning. David mentioned that Rutgers doesn't have an RPI projection by ESPN of under 43% of any game outside of USC. The 6th game.
This is that 43%. This
Yep.
is that 43%.
So easily could see this game being a win for Rutgers, especially if Dylan Raiola struggles early on in the season, which true freshman quarterback playing in the Big Ten, very easily could see that happening. But just for the sake of not being called a homer, I'm going to have this as a loss, as the first loss of the season.
They have a good defense on top of that. Dylan Raiola is the guy. I think he's actually pretty damn good. I've gotten to see him in high school a little bit, whether it be rivals camps and stuff. But I don't know. I just can't see them winning this one. I think it's too tough for them. I think Nebraska, like Mike said before, 90-something thousand fans. It's another crazy atmosphere. I think it's going to hurt them. I don't think Rutgers pulls this one off.
All right, I'm going to go against the grain, and I'm going to pick a Rutgers victory here. And here's why. First of all, I think Rutgers is going to be by far the best defense that Nebraska has faced all season. And I'm going to give you, Larry, the shout out here, because you know who Nebraska's offensive coordinator is? It is one Marcus Satterfield, who was fired after his 2017 season where he decided not to play Hayden Rettig at Tennessee Tech. And then, he didn't free Rettig, got fired, somehow ended up at South Carolina, got fired, and now he's at Nebraska. And what I saw from their offense, I don't think last year could have been saved by a good quarterback. I didn't know what they were doing at times, so I got to win.
I love the optimism. I do think in terms of it being homecoming for Nebraska, I think that, Matt Rule, I think one kind of talked about, storyline for this game is just a familiarity between the staffs. Obviously, two Northeast coaches going at it. And I think this is a game that Rutgers represents well, but falls short on the road. But I think a game that could pay dividends down the road in terms of how they play to actually give confidence for the rest of the season, despite having a loss.
I early on looked at this schedule and I was fairly confident that we drop one of either Nebraska or Wisconsin. And I think there's a couple reasons why you could go either direction on that. I stand by that, that we'll lose one of them. I'm not positive which one, but my thing is this. I think Matt Rule, we know he's the real deal, especially at the college level. The quarterback could struggle. He's young, but he's the real deal. We're at Nebraska. It's homecoming. It's a traditional team who hasn't necessarily had traditional success as of late, but it's still been tough for us to get over the hump against some of these teams that are decent teams on the road. They're going to have a packed house. And if we're coming off the high that I think we're going to be coming off based on my predictions, and now we're going on the road, I think that's a time where we might come back to earth. But similar to what Aaron said, that could build and bode well for the rest of the season because it's a lesson we'll have to learn and reflect upon. I'm giving us a loss on the road.
So next up, we have a home game against Wisconsin. Rutgers obviously has never beaten Wisconsin as a Big Ten team. I think they break that streak this year just because I think Rutgers is just such a senior-laden team. I think they have enough offensively, both in the run game and pass game, that they're going to win these games that maybe they wouldn't in the past. I think they find a way to grit this out. I think they're able to find a way to I think Wisconsin's still in that like weird teenage like puberty stage of trying to adapt from like a smash mouth run game to a pure like air raid offense under Longo. I don't know, like we said earlier, if that's going to work out. But I see Rutgers winning this game. Wisconsin's breaking in a new quarterback again this year. So I think Rutgers finds a way to win against Wisconsin.
I mean, speaking of quarterbacks, I'm very anti-Tyler Van Dyke. I just think he had that one good season like 2 years ago, and he's still kind of riding that high. I don't think he's going to be that good for them. On top of that, their defense isn't really the best. There was 9 times last season where they allowed quarterbacks to hit on over 62% of their passes. And if you look among those quarterbacks, one of them was Jaden Daniels, of course. Another was Cam Ward, both good quarterbacks, but the rest were kind of meh. And I think if Athan's able to complete his passes like we think he's going to be able to, on top of Kyle Monanga's run game, I think this should be a win for Rutgers.
I'm going to go the reverse. I'm going to go with a loss. Rutgers just has not beat them. I'm higher on Van Dyke than you. I probably watched more of his time when I was living in Miami. I think that they have good coaching at all 3 levels. Their best defensive players, they lost a lot of guys, but Holman and Wohler, who are their 2 most important, are back. Malusi's back, who I think is a good college running back. Prove it to me, Rutgers. Proves me wrong on this one, but we have never been close with Wisconsin. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think this is one of those where it really can change the ceiling of the season in terms of what Rutgers needs to do. But I think this is going to be a really close game. But I actually see it as a loss also. I think physicality-wise, Wisconsin, it's always a tough game. Rutgers obviously kind of, let them off the hook last year in Madison. It's certainly a game those seniors want to win. I think the crowd should be a great crowd for this game. I think it's going to be another close loss that, again, I think is something that I guess my theme of this team is I think you're seeing a different start to the season than last year. And I think a lot of people have kind of underestimated this 4-game stretch with Virginia Tech, Washington, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. And I see another loss here.
I think, like I said earlier when I was talking about Virginia Tech, if you want to get where you want to go, you want to be that program, you got to win these games. I have not been bullish on Rutgers beating traditional powers, who have stuck to their guns like in Iowa. Last year, there was a lot of buzz. I had predicted a loss from the beginning, and I didn't change it when we were starting to look good because Iowa had certain strengths in the trenches and their style of play that were tried and true that was going to be difficult for us to get past. Mike made a good point about the fact that this team and program is kind of like in puberty, trying to go away from their old tried and true institutional strength and trying to switch up to what they, where they want to go. We almost beat them last year, save for some turnovers and some, a game got away from us, and that was on the road. This game's at home. This team is not the Wisconsin of old. I think we're pretty tough ourselves. We showed that last year, grinding out yards in the run game. It's time to grow up and to beat Wisconsin when we have the chance at home, and I think we do it this year.
Man, I'm fired up, and following Larry, I guess, just isn't easy. I didn't have myself in your shoes there earlier, Rich, but yeah,
told you.
Tough act to follow. Let's go to our homecoming game. We're now halfway through the season. I got us at 5-1. Richie's got us at 4-2. David's got us at 4-2. Aaron, the what I think most of us would call the eternal optimist around Rutgers, has us at 3-3, and Larry has us at 5-1. I don't see us losing this game in reality. I know I talked about it as a trap game. I personally think UCLA is going to have a really tough time. I think they might be in line for the worst team in the Big Ten this year, given their coaching changes so late in the process. Sean Foster's a first-time coach. Their talent is a pretty steep drop-off from last year. I think Rutgers wins this homecoming matchup against UCLA, and it sets up one of the biggest games in Rutgers history, especially in the Big Ten, that Friday night game against USC on the road. And that's supposed to be one. Sorry.
Geez, putting a loss already. Yeah, no, Foster, new head coach. I know he's got Eric Bieniemy running his offense. Do we really know how good Eric Bieniemy is?
No.
That's the big question mark. There you go. They're also losing 2 pass rushers that combined for 21 sacks in total last year. That's going to hurt their defense a ton. New head coach, guy that's never been a coordinator before. New/old quarterback in Gravers. I forget which one it is, but either way, I mean, he got replaced by Dante Moore pretty quickly in the season. Now he's back as a starter again. There's just too many question marks about this UCLA team. I think Mike's right. I think they're going to be one of the worst in the Big Ten this year. And I think they'll just preach it's transition phase. It's a transition phase. Just give us time, which, I mean, you kind of have to, I guess, if you're UCLA, because you can't afford to keep firing coaches like this. Or, losing Chip Kelly like that.
Yeah, I got to win. I mean, the Bieniemy factor is interesting. They had a really good defense last year. Pretty much all those guys are gone. Rutgers better win this one.
Kyle Monunga is not going to let Rutgers lose to Jalen Berger and UCLA Bruins.
I forgot about him.
On homecoming. I think they bounced back after a disappointing loss the week before, and they beat the Bruins pretty handily.
They don't fall into the trap. They beat UCLA and take care of business. No, that's not a foreshadowing of my prediction.
Is that in LA?
Is USC in LA?
Oh, is UCLA in Los Angeles? I'm just making sure.
Well, it's in Westwood. It's in Westwood, which is part of LA.
Oh, I thought you were making a joke.
Yeah, see, Aaron got it. Yeah, there we go.
At the press conference,
Right.
He said, if you didn't know, we're in LA.
We're moving slow today.
Yeah.
So Rutgers will have its 6th game in 6 weeks at USC. As I previously mentioned when we were talking about the general schedule, USC has struggled with physical teams the last few years not just the last few years, but under Riley. I think USC is also going to have a really hard time adjusting to the rigors of playing a Big Ten schedule. I think they could adapt by the time they play Rutgers, but they'll also be playing their 6th game in 6 weeks. I just think the talent discrepancy and playing on a short week is going to do in Rutgers, but this game would not surprise me if they won, but I'm not going to predict that they win this game. I have Rutgers losing at USC before their bye week.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. It's just a short week, Friday night, 11 p.m. I made a joke before about Flaherty staying awake, but I'm dead serious about that one. Like, that's a tough one. Like, it's going to be late. They're still a good team at the end of the day. I know they lost Caleb Williams. They lost a couple other pieces, but they're still a damn good team, damn good coaching staff. Mike said it before, there'll be adjustments to the Big Ten game, but I don't think those adjustments are going to happen versus Rutgers. I think they'll be fine versus Rutgers. I have USC winning.
Well, having sat through the Fresno State game at Fresno State under similar circumstances, I'm going to go with a loss. The thing that scares me was when Schiano faces a quarterback and coach that are very good, and I just think that's what's going to happen in this game, especially on a short week.
It is interesting. USC plays at Maryland the week before. after hosting Penn State. So they're coming home on short rest after an East Coast trip. Rutgers was home 2 weeks prior to that, obviously on their own West Coast trip. But I do think, yeah, it's a lot to ask. I do think Rutgers plays well, but I think they fall short, and there's just too much talent on offense for USC.
Aaron brings up a point that gives me pause on this because of the travel, situation with USC I wasn't aware of. But at the end of the day, I mean, as much as I say we've got to go in and make things happen, sure we do. But traveling to the West Coast, 11 p.m. kickoff. If we're riding as high as I've predicted thus far and doing, so well, we're going to come back down to earth at some point. I don't necessarily think this team's very good, but world beaters, I don't think so. I'm predicting a loss.
So the only unanimous loss so far on the schedule through 8 weeks, I have us at 6-2. Richie has us at 5-3. David has us at 5-3. Aaron has us at 4-2 or 4-4. Larry has us at 6-2. We have a bye leading into the Minnesota game. I think this is a situation where Minnesota might be really on thin ice at this point as a team because, PJ Fleck had a lot of turmoil the last few years. He had that great 2019 season, but he seems like a guy who kind of hits a crescendo and has a really hard time keeping that momentum of a program. I think Ethan Kaliakmanis probably had this game circled on his schedule since he signed up to play for Rutgers. Rutgers has 15 days between the USC game and Minnesota. Schiano is very good after buys. Historically, I'm going to say Rutgers wins this game against Minnesota, and it might cause Minnesota to actually have to change in terms of leadership in their program after the season, similar to what we've seen in the years past.
I mean, the storylines write themselves. PJ Fleck, coach for Schiano, coach Shiraka and Harris-Samiak, both coach for both head coaches. Corey Heatherman's now the DC at Minnesota. Ethan Kaliakmanis is now the quarterback at Rutgers. There's just so many storylines among this game. I don't think they're that good of a team. Now, I like Brosmer. I thought he was a good get for them out of the portal, but and I like Darius Taylor. I think their running back's a stud, and it's a similar style to Rutgers, but their OC is a little incompetent, it seems like currently. And I'm Schiano after a bye week is just a different guy. When you give him time to scheme against the team, he just doesn't lose for the most part. What was it, the one bowl game, I think it was, that they lost out of the 5 or 6 he's made? You give him enough time to scheme up against the team, I think he'll win this one, and I think they'll win it not handedly, but it'll be a pretty close game.
I got a win on this one as well. Just talking about Minnesota, I think when I watched their show about the Big Ten Road Show, they just blamed every failure last year on their QB. That's what every single person said, coaches, players. And I don't think that they're taking seriously some of the foundational problems that they have within their program. And so the biggest takeaway I'll have is this. When there was the Berlin Wall, which direction were people going? And I think that's kind of the same thing here, with all respect to Corey Heatherman.
Jeez.
First off, I wanted to say that I'm not rooting for a 4-4 start, but as a gesture to my friends at the Night Report, the message boards would be off the hook during the bye week if they are 4-4. So that would be a benefit of that start. But I think the Kaliakmanis game, I think, I don't think it's and this, I'm not trying to start anything, but I think it's been kind of quelled in terms of Kaliakmanis leaving Minnesota, and maybe it's been pitched as kind of amicable, but kind of to David's point that he's kind of gotten thrown under the bus since he's left. I think he's going to be fired up for this game. Rutgers coming off a bye. Great points about Schiano, how Rutgers is prepared after a bye game. This is where I kind of flip, because I feel like last year they had that hot start. They started 6-2, had the brutal November. I think I'm much more optimistic about their November schedule this year. And I think that things could start to turn around with Minnesota, a win at home.
This is a team on the ropes. You guys hit all the points that needed to be hit. It's at home. We get the victory. It's a win.
So now Rutgers goes on the road to a Maryland team that for years Rutgers was kind of neck and neck with them. But I think as the Ash era lingered on into Schiano, the separation started. Rutgers has typically struggled against Maryland in recent years, and it's like a few of you had said, they were one of the few pass-heavy teams Rutgers would regularly face, and it was kind of a change in style that would give Rutgers fits, especially late in the season. With that being said, Maryland lost arguably the best quarterback in program history, and I don't fully believe that he's the best in history because they've had some really good quarterbacks in the past, like Frank Reich and Boomer Esiason. But Talia, I think, is the all-time leader in terms of passing yardage in Big Ten history when you include some stats.
Oh, you mean you didn't hear them say it 50,000 times last year during the podcast?
Yeah. So I don't really respect Billy Edwards as a quarterback, who is their one guy in the competition for winning the quarterback job, and MJ Morris is a transfer in from NC State. I think Rutgers gets the monkey off their back here and finds a way to beat Maryland. Even though Maryland does have very good skill position players, I think Rutgers finds a way to win and continues the momentum of a really good season.
I know you said this about the last one about if Rutgers wins, PJ Fleck might be on the hot seat there. I think Mike Loxley could be on the hot seat if and when Rutgers wins. They don't have an answer at quarterback. Talia's gone. You can't kind of ride the coattails of him anymore if you're Mike Loxley. It's game over. MJ Morris isn't that good, and Billy Edwards is worse. He went 6 of 20 against Auburn last year. Like that's brutal. Like 6 of 20 is Gavin Wimsatt numbers. I'm sorry to keep bringing the guy up, but like these are bad numbers. They don't have a quarterback. They have a decent defense. I think their secondary is okay. Or I shouldn't say okay. Their secondary is actually pretty good, but their just offense is just so lackluster without Talia that I just don't think they're going to have an option to even score points this year, really.
All right. Well, I hate the turtle more than anybody here, probably, but I think you're correct about the QB accuracy. I think Loxley needs a QB who's accurate to really look like a good offense. But I'll put this out for you. Rutgers has only beaten Maryland 3 times in the last decade. The first one, they had to come back from a 25-point deficit. The second, they had to beat a 5th-string quarterback who completed a touchdown pass that was called back for a penalty. And Rutgers held on in 2017. And in 2020, Rutgers had to get a personal foul on that wiped out an interception that would have iced the game for Maryland. So until they can just win, I got to mark it as a loss, as much as I hate to say it.
Yeah, I think, that's some sound reasoning in terms of their lack of success against Maryland. Actually, to Mike's earlier point, at one of these episodes, in terms of Rutgers being in shootouts, we've seen some great Rutgers-Maryland shootouts in the past. I think this is going to be one of those. And I think in terms of, Maryland's at Oregon the week before, and I think that they could have a worse record than I have Rutgers at this point. And I think although Maryland has more talent from a recruiting perspective on the roster, and I think a bad matchup typically with their speed, I think this is a gutted out, senior laden victory on the road. They finally break through on the road this season, and they get to 6-4 with serious momentum going down the stretch.
I kind of echo Dave here. I mean, we should beat this team. We could beat this team. I won't be surprised if we beat them. But I had us losing one of the last 4 games of the season. I just don't think we win out completely, especially with how bullish my predictions are in general. Maryland has out-recruited us in a lot of ways. I don't know that it translates without Tagovailoa still there this year. That being said, they just have a plethora of playmakers still. And until we can go and beat them, I mean, the last 3 years – it's teed up for us to at least be competitive, and we just get blown out of the water. I mean, until we do it, that's the loss I'm going with. It could just as easily be at Michigan State, but I'm giving it to them against Maryland. It could also be another trap game. You put Minnesota out of business, maybe PJ Fleck out of a job, and you're feeling high and you're feeling good, and you go on the road to Maryland, and all of a sudden, to a mediocre crowd, you lose.
You can certainly see that. Heading into the final 2 games of the season, our final home game, senior day against Illinois. Illinois is a team that has kind of fallen off a bit in terms of, they've won some big individual games, like the 9 overtime game at Penn State the one year where Penn State, I think, was in the top 10. Brett Bielema is a really good coach, but I just think they don't really have the horses this year. I'm going to say Rutgers wins on senior day. Put them at 9-2, and I hope these predictions are correct because I look like a huge homer right now.
I'm not going to go super in depth on this one, but they lost their 2 starting defensive tackles this year. I think you just kind of pound it up the gut with Monangai at this point in the season and just kind of run the ball, run the game out, run the clock out. I don't think it's going to be a crazy scoring game. I think it could be similar to their last matchup where I think it was 22-14 in a Rutgers victory. And I think it's going to be similar to that. Add in senior day, a little bit more momentum for the Scarlet Knights, and it's 3 in a row. So keep it riding that high.
I mean, I know we're at the point where we're really losing grip on what will actually happen because so much can happen between now and then. But I'm just going to say win because just like I said, Shiano has struggled with that coach quarterback tandem. He doesn't usually struggle with facing other like-minded coaches unless they're Brian Ferentz. Or Kirk Ferentz, I should say. Brian obviously got the best of him last year, but Kirk is a good coach. But other than that, Shiano usually takes care of business against these like-minded coaches.
Illinois is one of those programs I think Rutgers fans tend to think Rutgers is better than, but hasn't proven it really head-to-head in recent years. Obviously, a lot of that was with Ash. But I think this Rutgers team, above all else, is built for November and this schedule. And on senior day with this group, I can't see them losing. I think it'll be close, but I think they win their 3rd in a row and go into with a big opportunity in the last week.
I'm going with a win. I think Illinois, if this season shapes up the way we think, which there's a lot to be discovered between now and that game, Rutgers should line up toe to toe and just be better than them at this point. And it's at home.
So now we're at our final game of the season at Michigan State. I think this is where Rutgers falls in that final stretch. I think Jonathan Smith is one of the most underrated coaches in college football. I really like Aiden Childs as a quarterback. This is a team that you would hope to face in week 3 or 4 as they're trying to establish themselves. But facing them in the final week of the season where they could, be playing for bowl eligibility here, playing for a lot more than Rutgers is playing for, because I don't think a 9-2 record with 2 Big Ten losses, Rutgers is going to be in competition for a Big Ten title appearance or potentially a college football playoff appearance, given their schedule. I have Rutgers falling to Michigan State here in the final game of the year.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's kind of said it before. I think Aiden Childs hasn't showed a lot yet, but I think he's a good quarterback, and I think he's reunited with the same head coach that he had last year that he was developing with and working with. I think on top of that, a certain running back for Michigan State's going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder going into this one in Kayron Adams, so you got to watch out for that one. And I think Michigan State's they're a sneaky team. I think by this point in the year, they should have not the culture completely fixed, but they should have it a little bit more fixed compared to what it was under Mel Tucker. And they should have some of the younger guys, up and coming guys, starting to play more and more. I think Jonathan Smith's a good head coach, and I think he's eventually going to turn Michigan State around. And I think this year they might not be phenomenal, but I think they have a shot at bowl eligibility, and I think that this win here should help them.
All good points, but I do think Rutgers is going to win this game. I think last year Rutgers played a lot better than – I know they needed to pull a miracle, but I thought they had generally outplayed Michigan State in that game. You could make an argument they almost outplayed them the year before. In 2021, they were burned by big plays, and they beat them in 2020. If you look at Michigan State, their outgoing quarterbacks, I know 2 of the 3 already lost their QB battles. So that kind of tells me that I don't think their talent level is as good, though I do like Childs. And I really think Smith, he was a great quarterback at Oregon State. They went 11-1 during his one of his years there as a player, and he's been a great coach. But I think what's going to ultimately happen to Michigan State is that the new staff is all this energy is going to run out of gas by the end of the season. And I'm hopeful that this is the year that Rutgers doesn't run out of gas. So I got to win.
Yeah, Michigan State has a crazy middle part of the schedule where they play Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, and Michigan, 2 of which on the road. They have a better November, and they probably have – this is the only game Rutgers plays where the opponent has an extra day rest. They play Purdue the Friday night before. But I do agree with David. I think this is a game Rutgers can win. I know it's a new coaching staff. I really like Jonathan Smith, but Shiano has proven that they've – been able to compete with Michigan State in a way Rutgers hasn't had previously. And I think that there's a lot of players on this team that lost that game 2 years ago when they came really close to winning. And I think they were able to gut it out and really finish this season on a big high note with an undefeated November.
Look, I remember when we beat Michigan State in 2020, the COVID year. We were at whatever. I forget the name of that taco place right in New Brunswick. But we were there and we watched it. We went nuts, and it was like the jump off point for the Schiano 2.2 era. 2.1 era. And people started to believe. I like Schiano's record against Michigan State. I like everything you guys said. I think by the end of the year here, again, if we're a team on the rise and we're a matured program by now, and Michigan State is still rebuilding this year and trying to get where they want to go, the last game of the season, Rutgers should go win it and end it the right way. I think our programs we're a little bit ahead of them, and we should show it. I think we get the victory.
So, Larry, you don't think that Joe Rossi is going to completely shut us down as their DC or what?
Oh, God, I forgot about him.
Oh, remember those years?
Sheesh.
Sadly, I do.
I think we all do, but geez. No, I don't buy the Rossi hype, no.
Just sent a shudder down my spine. So the final record predictions, I got us going 9-3 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Richie has us going 8-4, 6-3 in the Big Ten. David has us going 8-4, 6-3 in the Big Ten. Aaron has us going 8-4, 6-3 in the Big Ten. And Larry has us going 9-3, 6-3 in the Big Ten. So we're very consistent with conference record predictions. The over/under for this team in terms of win total is 6.5, and there's no juice on it right now. So if you can get to Pennsylvania and you trust any of us, maybe you should make that bet before the season starts. Is there anything in closing you guys wanted to touch on the schedule before we mercifully let our listeners stop listening to us for a little bit?
I would just say that I have us at 9-3, and I understand that's bullish and that's confident and optimistic. I think the margin of error where this could be a great season like I've predicted here, and a much less, I wouldn't say we're going to have a disastrous season, hopefully, but a much more underwhelming season. The margin of error game by game is so paper thin. And that's game by game. You could have a game you thought we're going to win that we lose, but then come right back and win a close game. And it's going to be really interesting to deal with the ebbs and flows of this season. I'm banking on, the fact that this is a matured program and that they can string wins together and string close wins together and overcome and bounce back from adversity when we lose a game to get to where this program wants to be. If they can't do it this year, it's just, it doesn't get any easier, schedule-wise and things. So I'm banking on that, but it could go either way. So it's going to be interesting.
Two things. First off, Schiano loves to say this is a developmental program. You have a lot of players in their final year that are at the end of their developmental cycle. You have to show results to be able to market your program that way and to be able to keep momentum on the recruiting trail. So it's obviously, for many reasons, it's such a critical season. And I totally agree with Larry. It is, this could certainly turn upside down pretty easily. Injuries, obviously, a major concern. But this is so critical for the long-term success of this program to keep momentum and to be able to show real results in the developmental process. And then lastly, I just wanted to say this was awesome. And for all the Scarlet Faithful listeners and people that watch me on a regular basis, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed this. And it was a great opportunity to collaborate with Larry and David, as always. But then Mike and Richie, we've been talking about this for a long time. So for everyone that listens to the Night Report, this is what the Rutgers fan base, it's all about in terms of community and supporting each other. And I think we've all independently done that. So to have us all as a group has been a lot of fun, and really appreciate everybody's efforts in putting this together.
I'll say that appreciate you guys having me. I know I'm predicting 8-4. They always have a clunker. I hope it's one of the ones I already predicted as a loss, because there's always a game when something goes wrong. So tell fans, please don't panic. I think that this season makes it unique is that pretty much every week you can go in as a fan thinking that Rutgers has a chance. And that's really something that's really all we ask for as fans. Obviously, we all hope that they go 15-0 or whatever it takes to win the college football playoff. But really, it's about entertainment and for us fans. And I'm hoping it's a good season on the banks, for all of us to enjoy it.
8-4, Duke's Mayo Bowl, January 3rd. Greg Schiano is getting mayo dumped all over him, and I
Are you guys
can't,
all coming? Are you coming to
can't
my house?
wait.
Though? Are you guys coming
Hey,
to my house for the tailgate or what?
I if you have
Absolutely.
beer, if the beers are flowing, that's it. I might not even work that game.
Is the Big Ten a part of the Duke's Mayo Bowl though?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Okay. That's good to know because I
Yeah.
know a lot of people are like throwing out these like it'd be funny watching Greg Schiano ritually sacrifice a Pop-Tart. It's like, well, you can't actually participate in that game though. So
Yeah.
while it would be hilarious, that's okay. So I'm glad to know the Duke's Mayo Bowl is in the realm of possibility.
Yes, and the Pac-12 teams can't get it because they have to go to their bowl tie-ins still. So
That's right.
we got a shot, baby.
I'm hoping for if the Big Ten gets 3 teams in the college football playoff, maybe Rutgers can sneak into the Music City Bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
That'd be a good one. Yeah, anything that's
I know.
not Detroit the day after Christmas.
Oh my God, no.
Well, after that, it really falls off.
Yeah,
it does. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who joined us, everybody who's listened, everybody who's liked, subscribed to all of our channels. We really appreciate you guys. It's been a banner year for Rutgers content, and I hope that it continues into a banner year for Rutgers athletics. We will see you in a future episode. Hopefully, I think we saw how well this collaboration worked. I think this won't be the last time we all get together. But thanks for listening, and see you next time.